workforce?
So I think companies are well positioned to move a little bit more quickly than some of our other institutions. Certainly, if you think about, no offense, but academia doesn't always move very quickly.
Well, I've heard, no.
That's a generalization. To be fair, that's a generalization. And we are seeing pockets break out from that.
Well, what I've heard is that academics is specifically designed not to change, right? So what you're saying.
So that draws back to the 14th century, but we can work on that. If you think about certainly our government institutions, policy making, the regulatory environment, not keeping up. There's legislation in front of the DC Council right here about autonomous vehicles. You have seen the Waymo cars running around. It's been sitting for 18 months. Yet, do we want to position ourselves as a global hub for innovation? Then we need to demonstrate that we are willing to take on innovative technologies. And the Washington Post did an op-ed about this over the weekend, something like that. So, there's a lot of cultural issues that are involved here, both at the company corporate level, but then also more broadly. If you think about the 20th century is really about conformance to standards. And a lot of our organizational structures were built around conforming to standards. We've seen, I'm sure Jim and Gallup have done surveys on this, that typically 2% of any population set has an entrepreneurial spirit, the willingness to go out and take those risks. And so we need to start changing that dynamic, because I would argue that most everybody is willing and capable of doing that, as long as we create the right circumstances for it to happen. When you're in your work groups at the university, or if you're in the workplace, try to stop saying no to new ideas is a tool that you can begin using, and rather saying, again, the example Jim was using for the Navy SEALs, it's like, no is not in the vocabulary. Here's the mission, how are we going to achieve it? And we tend to, in most of our organizations, use budget as a reason to say no. All right, well, I'm not suggesting you have unlimited budgets, but even within the constraints you have, how can you still achieve something? And so the cultural dynamic is something that we really have to grapple with, call it out, talk about it, and think about what are those things that we are holding on to that are preventing us from being more creative. There's been some great analytical work done as to why did Silicon Valley really rise as sort of a global innovation hub compared to Route 128 around Boston, because Boston was actually populated with a lot more tech companies at the time. And it came down to something very simple. It was hierarchy. Boston was stuck in hierarchy, and there wasn't any out in Silicon Valley. So Silicon Valley was really the Wild West. And so people were just innovating all the time. And you see the dynamics of that culture continuing to really present itself in Silicon Valley with capital attraction and talent attraction and things like that. So for our region in particular, a region that is wedded to the federal government for so many years, tends to be risk averse. For us to really prosper and reach our economic aspirations, we have to think very much about what is our culture and what are all the variables that are contributing to that culture, so we can kind of create that environment. But the opportunity is there. We can do that. The models are there, and we can emulate those and continue to push on those.